continuing our study of Philippians, this week I was thinking about, I heard this story this week. And the idea is, when we're kind of out of place, have you ever been like a visiting fan at a sporting event? Where, like, if you're a Seahawks fan, you're going to see the Seahawks play in New York or down in San Francisco, where you are definitely not a part of that crowd. You are definitely out of it. You do not feel at home. This is not your people. Or you're just in the wrong place. There are times that, I think about that a lot when people about coming to church. There have been times I've been to different churches where sometimes I feel out of place. I don't know what their traditions are. I don't know when to stand up, when to sit down, how to dress. All those things that I think about are barriers to people even joining us on a Sunday or even when we do something else. So I want to be aware of that. What are some things that we do where we feel we're just not at home? It's not our people. So I read this story this week, and I'm going to preface it by saying this. I found out later it's not true. It's an urban legend. So it takes a little bit of the cool out of the story. I thought about telling the story and saying that at the end, but my ethic won't allow me to do that. But it's the story of Richie the bear, which is an albino grizzly bear. And the story goes, he was seen in the woods, and scientists and environmentalists were like, this is somehow someone, like a zoo or somebody got a polar bear, and it is in the wrong part of the country. So they tranquilize and catch this bear and take it up to the Arctic with the polar bears, and there it is being bullied and can't survive and is off on its alone, and it can't catch food, and the scientists in the Arctic are like, this is not a polar bear, this is a grizzly bear. So they tranquilize Richie and take him back down to the Northwest, where 2 years later another set of scientists see this white bear and assume it is a polar bear that's escaped from a zoo or somebody bought as an exotic pet, and take it back to the Arctic, and the same thing happens again. And finally now he was now safe, and they've tagged it so that if ever good, well-meaning scientists capture this bear, it's not going to be in the wrong place. I love that story because it felt so much like how my life is sometimes. Constantly trying to fix a problem that isn't really a problem, right? Or especially for somebody else. We assume somebody else needs to change their life. But mostly about how horrible, if that were a true story. And I was really bummed because I was so ready to use that this morning. And when I looked it up, and it was like, no, it's never really, there's no proof that this ever happened. Which is not saying it's not true. So there's no proof that it was real. But how out of place that poor bear would feel. I'm minding my own business in the forest where I belong, and now I am taken to a snowy wasteland with other bears who hate me. I don't smell like them, I don't hunt like them, I don't get along with them, they're not my people, and going back and forth. I think there's a little bit like that. I did have a human experience of that. Deb and I, when we were first married, we took a drive across the country to visit these same brothers, one brother, in where was it? North Carolina? North Carolina. We drove from Southern California to North Carolina in a Honda Accord. And Deb was pregnant with our first term. So we decided, the best thing that I decided, again, I'm noticing a trend, I decided we would go camping along the way to save money instead of hotels. It is one of my favorite stories. I'm so sorry, Deborah. I'm going to add, there was a time she was having cravings, and she really wanted, what, you wanted watermelon? No, cantaloupe. Was it cantaloupe? She wanted cantaloupe, and we're driving through and couldn't find, so we stopped at kind of a big, like a grocery store / gas station, but it was kind of a bigger one, and I went in, they did not have cantaloupe. So I bought an orange back to the car. And she literally, as we're driving down the freeways, I do not want an orange, and threw it out the window. I learned a lesson that day, that if a pregnant woman says she's craving a cantaloupe, do not bring an orange. It's almost biblical, right? If she asks for bread, do I give her a stone? If she asks for fish, do I give her a snake? If she asks for cantaloupe, do I bring her an orange? No, you do not. Yes. So, this isn't that story. Anyway, we're on that same trip, and we were somewhere in the South. I forget where it was. And we stopped at a diner, and we kind of went in. It was that thing where there's talking. We walk in, silent. And finally, the hostess sits us down, and we just were completely ignored for like half an hour. And finally, we just decided, we don't belong here. And we got up and left. No one said a word. And I felt like as the door shut, people started talking again. Disco light is going. The music is playing, which I feel like happens at most parties that I go to. The minute I leave, the music gets ratchet. You see silhouettes vaulting past the window. What's going on? But when we don't belong. So there's this part where there's an uncomfortable feeling when you're living somewhere, when you're in a situation where it's not your home. It's not where you belong. And this section talks about that. So this week, we're talking about the idea of being home. What is home? And the first part is, home is with Jesus. You've heard that story, home is where the heart is, or home is where it's wherever my family is. Home is with Jesus. So Philippians 3:10-14 says this. Paul says, I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power. So man, there is a reflection there. There we go. I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. I want to suffer with him, share in his death, so that one way or another I will experience the resurrection from the dead. I don't mean to say that I have already achieved the things, or that I've already reached perfection, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed me. No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. This is a powerful section. This idea that the main goal in life, that the thing that is real, the place that we should be most comfortable is knowing Jesus. That should be our primary goal. And what does it mean to know? The idea to know here, that the idea here is not just to get acquainted with, but it means to become like Jesus. His idea is, I want to know the experience of Jesus. I want to be so close and so intimate with Jesus that it is like living with him. Practical, day-to-day living like Jesus, living with Jesus. And here's some ways that we can do that. This is how we can begin to know Jesus and have that as our primary goal. First of all, and I love that he talks about here, the first thing he says is, I got to realize that I'm not there yet. This is kind of a 12-steppy idea. The first thing is realizing that I'm not there yet. I haven't figured it out. That we are not the finished article. We have not yet attained it. And if we think that we are, if we think that we are living like Christ already, if we're already perfect, then we've missed the opportunity to know Jesus better. We need to be satisfied with Christ, satisfied with knowing him, satisfied knowing that he is in our life and leading us and empowering us, and our goal is to be like him, but we need to be dissatisfied with our own practice of following him. Does that make sense? This idea that we go, I can do this better. I am so thankful where I've come and what God has done in my life, and I need to continue to strive for it. Admit that we're not there yet. And the other thing I like is his single-mindedness, this press on, this idea of the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is living with Jesus. I like this idea that, hey, there's one thing, I got a lot of stuff, and he's saying, I'm imperfect, I want to experience the power of Jesus. Even if I suffer, I understand that somewhere in the middle of that, there's understanding of the joy that comes from just being loved by Jesus and learning to know him, even to the point of death, because then there's the resurrection, and that I can be closer to him without any barrier, so I know that that's going to happen, and I can experience that now and in the future. But he says, that is the one thing I do. He says, I forget the past. This has always been a little stumbling block for me. Because I do believe we need to study the past. We need to understand our history. We need to understand what has happened to us and where we've been. But what he's saying here is, it doesn't mean that there's no value in remembering or dealing with the past, but especially in context of what he's just talked about, right? What did we just finish saying? He's like, I had all this stuff that I counted as the most important thing. My past, my experience, my birthright, my study, my zeal, all that stuff I thought was so important. It isn't. It's trash. Remember that we just talked about that a couple of weeks ago. So here's what he's saying here. He's like, I'm going to forget the past. Not that it didn't happen, but I am going to forget all that. I'm not relying on that anymore. It's worthless. I don't live off the past. I got to admit, sometimes that's easy to think for those of us who've been followers of Christ for a long time. We kind of live off experiences and things we learned and moments that we had, and we realize, oh, that was 20 years ago. I haven't done anything since, except for kind of plod along or do the same stuff. I haven't changed my mind about anything. I haven't learned anything. I haven't shared with anyone a new way. I haven't had a new experience. I don't know if I'm any closer to Christ than I was when I first knew Christ. And Paul is saying, look, we can't live off that. We need to neither coast based on our past or wallow in our past, neither of which is helpful. Neither of which is going to help us know Christ better. One author said it this way, we can't be paralyzed by regret or complacent in triumphs. I like that. We can't be paralyzed by regret. Have you ever been to that place? Where you're just regretting a action or a moment or even something, and it freezes us. We can't move forward. Or the other is just as bad, that we remember our victories and kind of think that was enough. I've done my bit, and now I've grown all that I need to grow. So that we can press on, we can strain, we can work hard, we can strive for what's next and what's better in our connection with Jesus. And then there's this discipline part. I like this, that there's this self-discipline part. This wording is language is a lot like an athlete. That I strive, I work, I practice, I strain. If you read different translations of this, I have, in my program that I use to study sometimes, it has all the different translations lined up, and it's interesting, all the different words there sounded like someone preparing for the Summer Olympics. It's coming up. And I love that the stories sometimes in that this is the time for some of those people in those obscure sports. They get one shot every 4 years for their moment in the sun. And that they strive for years. Even the big Olympic sports are only usually popular every 4 years, at least in the States. Right? That these folks are striving. This is the idea that it's not all about just getting something. It's not all about their moment. It's they have to have a love and a care for that experience, that journey, that process. And that's what he's saying, that what's more important is that I'm striving. Striving to know Christ. There's never a moment of let go and let God in this part of knowing Christ, getting to know Christ, living with Jesus. It really is working hard to know Jesus, to really know him. Like we need to have continual time with him and focus on Christ. Doing an inventory and reflecting and changing and repenting and amending and accepting and offering forgiveness and grace and compassion. All these things that we can do to strive, that we can be constantly reflective on our own life and our behavior, and reflective on our own thinking, and reflective on Christ's thinking, and being connected and praying and understanding, and then doing what he said is to love and care for people in tangible ways. That he says that's the sign that you're loving me and you're knowing me, living like Christ. And then we can experience the joy of knowing Jesus, the power that comes from being at home with him. Suffering becomes an experience of his power and his grace, and experiencing the resurrection. We can experience the resurrection now, as just in that song, that when we are weighed down by our sin, when we are struggling, we can run out of that grave. We can be Lazarus. That Christ calls us out, that we can begin to experience the power and the joy of his resurrection right now. That we can experience life from death because Jesus experienced that and offers that. When we struggle and we face the consequence of a fallen world, there is experience as well as hope in the power of Jesus as we struggle. And understanding that the heavenly prize, yes, certainly it's hope for the future and after our death, but we can begin to experience that now. We can live with Jesus now. We can experience the joy and the power of his resurrection, and rather than the living death of living in sin, to experience the joy of living in the resurrection with Christ. And that's what allows us to press on. We are empowered by Christ, and we can continue on. So I ask myself, and I ask you, that one of the things we can do to help us strive is to ask ourselves, what's hindering me from knowing Jesus better? What's hindering me from knowing and living like him? Am I content where I'm at? Am I too content with the way I'm living? Or am I too disturbed and frozen by regret and my past? And do I really believe that I can experience the joy of knowing Christ in the middle of all circumstance? So we need to make our home with Christ, knowing Christ, living with Jesus. I don't want to say, it sounds, it's like that is our home, like roommates. That doesn't sound right, but the idea that we're so intimate, we're so close, we're constantly running into Jesus. We're constantly in our daily life involved with him, like a family member. And then we need to have a real home. So a home is with Jesus. Home is where our heart is. Where is our heart? It should be with Jesus. But then we have to know our real home, this next part, the real citizenship. Where are we really citizens? Philippians 3:15 through 21. Let all who are spiritually mature, says in 15, agree on these things. If you disagree on some point, I believe God will make it plain to you. Again, one of those unity type passages. Hey, we're going to disagree on stuff. And you know what? God's going to clear it up for you. And I like this thing, he's not going to say, and God's going to clear it up for them and they're going to agree with you. Right? That's kind of what we'd like. Lord, fix them so that I am right. No, he says, God's going to clear it up. But you must hold on to the progress that you've already made. Dear brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after me and learn from those who follow our example. For I've told you often before, and I say it again with tears in my eyes, that there are many whose conduct shows that they are really enemies of the cross of Christ. That they are headed for destruction. Their God is their appetite. They brag about shameful things, and they think only about life here on earth. But we're citizens of heaven, where the Lord Jesus Christ lives, and we are eagerly awaiting for him to return as our Savior. We will take out the weak mortal bodies and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using the same power with which he will bring everything under his control. I like that he starts off again with the joy of living in unity. This idea that there's going to be differences, there is going to be diversity, there is going to be equity in the church. And we're going to believe different things. We're going to have different histories, different pasts. And he's like, hey, don't let that separate you. Let God clear that up for you. That's a hard one. Especially if we want to be connected. And he may give you a different answer than he gives me, and we're supposed to still be unified. It's powerful, but I think that's part of the joy of experiencing Christ and being connected to Jesus. And then I love that he says, hey, hold on to the progress you've already made. Live worthy of the progress you've already made. You've come a long way. You've connected with Jesus. You've chosen to follow him. Don't give up on that. When things are hard, or when you struggle, or when you're arguing somebody, or maybe you've changed your mind, don't give up on that. Continue to hold on to that and find joy in that. Be joyful about that. Not proud of your past, not coasting on your past, but be worthy of what God's already done in your life. I love that. And then he says, hey, choose the right role model. And this is, again, where, especially when I was younger studying this, where Paul goes, hey, be like me. Does that seem proud to you? You got to understand, I mean, he's been so humble up to this point. I thought, oh, this was great. I am nothing. It's all trash. And this is where he says, but if you're looking for someone to follow, hey, just be like me. He just said I haven't attained it. I'm not perfect. But here's what he's saying. He's doing all that stuff he was talking about. I'm striving. I'm being unified. I'm trying to figure it out. So if you got to follow somebody, follow me. And then he says, and us, the others that are following me. Be like us. Follow our progress. Those who follow and are humble and Jesus-centered and focused. Not enemies or religious like he used to be. He says, no, the humble people who are following Jesus and making that what they strive for, to know Jesus, to live with Jesus, that's what we should follow. So he gives a description of living like citizens here, and also what those who aren't, the enemies of the cross. I'm afraid here, I've changed my mind a little bit, or at least perspective on who the enemies that he's talking about here. Those who are self-centered. Remember before he was talking about the enemies are dogs and trash. Those who put other rules on people. He was talking about those who added rules. I think those are the enemies of the cross. You notice he doesn't say these are enemies of Jesus. He says these are enemies of the cross of Christ. Because the cross of Christ shows Jesus showing the ultimate sacrifice. Ultimate weakness, allowing those who were weaker than him to harm him. And for the sake of others, sacrificing himself, being humiliated, allowing that to happen to him for the sake of the people he was trying to serve and love. Being willing to be perceived as weak when he was instead being incredibly strong. If you're an enemy of the cross of Christ, you're somebody who wants nothing to do with seeming weak. You don't want to sacrifice. You want to grab what is yours. Your God is your appetite. It's translated, their God is their belly, the thing that just fills them up. We think of sometimes acting as an enemy is doing a bunch of bad stuff, but no, Jesus is saying here, or Paul is saying here, those who are enemies of the cross are those who want power, those who want to care for themselves at the expense of others, those who want to dominate, those who want to control, even at the cost of their own moral and ethic and love and care. Enforcing and imposing, again, from the context before talking about circumcision, those who are imposing their own ethic instead of loving people but putting a burden on others. And rather than letting them come to know and genuinely live with Christ, to know Jesus, to know the joy of his suffering, to know the ultimate love of him, instead trying to control behavior for their own ends, to make their own lives more comfortable, to satisfy their own appetites. Those are the enemies of the cross. Those who can't stand the idea of weakness and sacrifice. So we're supposed to set our hearts on heaven. We're supposed to set our goals. Our ultimate home is to be with Christ, to be with Jesus. We need to look heavenwards and let that model inform and motivate our actions here. And I want to say this, our mode isn't focused on not getting to heaven so that this doesn't matter. There's sometimes I've experienced that where people are like, hey, all that matters is getting to heaven. I'm going to heaven, so this doesn't matter. Let it burn. Whether we're talking about the ecology or people in poverty or injustice, like, well, I'm going to heaven. This doesn't matter. You know what? And I'm going to shout the gospel. I'm going to yell the good news at you until you get it, because the goal is to get you into heaven, regardless of what's going on here. No, Paul's talking about here. Like, we're experiencing heaven now, and we can experience it in the future. We're supposed to be living it now, right? We are citizens of heaven right now, he says. We're not citizens of earth. We don't stop being a citizen when you leave home. This is the example I was thinking of. We went to Croatia a few years ago. It's one of my favorite places in the world. So what if I decided, you know what, America is great, but I'm too scared, or I just want to go live on the beach in Croatia, and so I do all the paperwork, spend time, I somehow am allowed to get a passport, and I get to become a citizen of Croatia. And so the problem is I can't go there because of a bunch of stuff. I can't get there for 6 months. But what would I do? I would begin to learn Croat. I would begin to learn their customs. I would even begin to cook Croatian food. I would probably make you sick to death of hearing about Croatia. I would talk about it all the time. I probably wouldn't start remodeling my house and expanding it, or buying property in the United States, or really getting into finding out, becoming a fan of American stuff. I would begin to let go of the stuff of where I'm living. I'd still be living here. I'd still be meeting with people. I'd still be communicating. I'd still be helping my neighbor. I'd still be surviving. But I'm becoming more and more in my mindset focused on somewhere else. That's what we're doing here. Yes, we're citizens. We're on the earth. We're here for a purpose. We're to love and care and worry about what's going on here and tangibly help each other. But we're also realizing that what's important is not this. It's living with Christ. It's living as a citizen of heaven now. What is a citizen of heaven? We know that it's one who loves Christ and loves people, because that's what knowing Jesus is. We need to have the culture of heaven here. Love, give, care, listen, share the good news, sacrifice, work for justice, look out for those who are weaker. That is the ethic of a citizen of heaven. That's what it is like in heaven, that we worship God and we have perfect connection with each other. We're supposed to store up our treasures in heaven. That's where our citizenship lies. How do we do that? We love others. We care for them like Jesus did. Jesus cared for people in such amazing ways. Sometimes it was listening. There was a few times it was rebuke, usually for people who thought they were really good people. He gave them tangible help. He healed. He fed. He cared. He listened. And he loved and worshiped God. That's how we know Jesus. There's a temptation to think that looking heavenward and being a citizen of heaven is being in church and having a Christian bubble. There's another movie, I forget the name of it, but it's Tom Hanks, where he's living in an airport. Have you seen this one? Terminal, thank you, Jim. Where he's stuck between worlds. And his passport, he's not allowed into the States, but he can't go home either. So he ends up kind of surviving. He finds ways to make a few cents at a time, and lives on the Burger King that's in there. And it's a fun story. But the idea is, I think sometimes the goal is to get out of the airport. We're citizens of heaven. We need to live in the world as citizens of heaven. Let's not hide out in the airport. Let's go out there and care for others. Living as citizens in heaven. Knowing Jesus and realizing our home is with him will change everything about how we live, and it should permeate our choices, our pursuits, and our relationships. So I'm going to leave with this. Matthew 6:19-21. Don't store up your treasure here on earth, where moths eat them, and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. May we be people who are intimately familiar with our Savior Jesus, because we live with him daily, and grow in the connection because we live as citizens of his kingdom, both now and in eternity. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week.